July 4th, 1961. Deep beneath the freezing waves of the North Atlantic, the command center of the Soviet nuclear submarine, K-19, is suddenly bathed in the terrifying, rhythmic glow of red emergency lights. The klaxon screams, a sound that, in the confined, pressurized space of a submarine, sounds like a final judgment. In the reactor compartment, a high-pressure cooling pipe of the primary circuit has just shattered. A blinding, unnatural blue light erupts from the uranium core. The engineers inside the compartment do not know it yet, but they are already dead men walking. They report a metallic taste in their mouths, the first sign of massive ionization within the human body. Their skin begins to tingle as the radiation shears through their cells. Captain Nikolai Zateyev stares at the pressure gauges dropping to zero. He is hundreds of feet underwater with a catastrophic nuclear meltdown on his hands, 3 armed thermonuclear warheads in the launch tubes, and a crew that is about to cook alive from the inside out. How did the absolute pride of the Soviet Navy become a radioactive nightmare? To understand this horror, we must go back 2 years to a shipyard built on frozen bones, paranoid politics, and impossible deadlines. The year is 1959. The shadow of the Cold War is not just a political concept. It is a physical weight pressing down on the Soviet Union. The United States Navy has just changed the rules of human conflict forever. American nuclear submarines of the George Washington class are already prowling the oceans, armed with Polaris ballistic missiles capable of striking Moscow in minutes while remaining virtually undetectable. The Soviet leadership is gripped by a terrifying realization. They are completely exposed. Deep in the Kremlin, Premier Nikita Khrushchev issues an ultimatum. We must have our own response. And we must have it yesterday. The Soviet Navy must have its own nuclear missile submarine. Project 658 becomes the state's highest priority. There is no time for prototype testing. In the design bureaus of TSKB-18, engineers work around the clock. They know they are designing a vessel unlike anything the USSR has ever seen, under conditions of desperate shortages in materials and time. The task of building this monster falls to the Severodvinsk shipyard, number 402, a brutal industrial complex situated on the freezing shores of the White Sea. The conditions here are beyond human endurance. To meet the impossible deadlines, the shipyard operates 24 hours a day, in 3 exhausting shifts. In winter, temperatures plummet below -30 degrees, yet work in the slipways never stops. Thousands of exhausted workers build K-19 amidst clouds of icy steam and welding smoke. It is a frantic, chaotic environment, and the ship demands blood before it even touches the water. Death becomes a common occurrence in Severodvinsk as safety protocols are ignored in favor of speed. The first victim is a female painter, crushed to death by a falling steel plate weighing several tons. Shortly after, a fire breaks out in the aft compartments as welding sparks ignite spilled chemicals. 2 workers are trapped in a cloud of toxic smoke from burning insulation. Their bodies are carried out hours later, blackened by soot. Another worker falls into a deep ballistic missile tube and breaks his neck. Among the shipyard workers, a dark whisper begins to spread. They say the submarine is cursed. They give her an unofficial nickname, even before her launch, the Widow. The black steel of the hull feels cold, not from the frost, but from an internal, hostile presence. Into this atmosphere of dread and political paranoia steps Captain First Rank Nikolai Zateyev. He is only 34, but he is already one of the most respected submariners in the country. Zateyev is not just a military man. He is a pragmatist, walking through the incomplete compartments of K-19 while she is still on the dry dock. He is quietly horrified. The build quality is questionable. Welding seams are uneven, and the electronics frequently short-circuit. But the most terrifying flaw is hidden in the very heart of the ship, the reactor compartment. K-19 is powered by two VMA pressurized water reactors. The primary cooling system consists of hundreds of meters of pipes under a pressure of 200 atmospheres, and this system has no backup. If a pipe bursts, if a pump fails, the reactor will melt down. Zateyev reports to the Naval High Command, demanding the installation of an emergency backup cooling system. The response from Moscow is brief. Any changes to the design will delay the launch by 6 months. Delay will be treated as sabotage of a state mission. The Soviet leadership has a plan, and that plan has no room for safety. Zateyev is ordered to keep quiet and accept the ship as she is. October 1959, a day of triumph. K-19 is ready for her formal christening. High-ranking leadership, military attachés, and party bosses are in the stands. But even the celebration is shadowed by paranoia. Tradition dictates that a woman must smash a bottle of champagne against the bow to bring good luck. However, the admirals refuse to allow a woman near the highly classified submarine. The honor is assigned to a male captain, third rank. The officer swings the bottle with all his might against the hull. But there is a detail. The ship has been coated in a thick layer of experimental acoustic rubber to dampen noise. The bottle hits this rubber like a soft pillow and bounces off, completely intact. He swings a second time, with the same result. The glass bottle falls into the water without breaking. A deathly silence falls over the shipyard. Hundreds of eyes stare at the black mass of the submarine. Sailors are superstitious men. Everyone knows a ship that refuses her christening is a ship that will not bring her men home. Zateyev keeps his face completely devoid of emotion, but he knows the psychological blow this has dealt to his crew. The young lieutenants, fresh from the academy, look at the ship with suspicion. They were called to serve on the peak of technical achievement, but they can't feel the scent of death emanating from these steel compartments. K-19 slowly slides down the slipway into the icy waters of the White Sea. Massive waves spread from her hull. This is the beginning of her short and tragic journey, a journey that will lead her to the center of the Atlantic, to a moment when the entire world will hold its breath. 1960. The sea trials of K-19 are conducted at a feverish pace. The submarine frequently returns to base at the end of a tow line. Seals leak, fuses blow, and the water desalinators fail. Zateyev spends more time in the compartments than in his own home. He knows every bolt of this boat, and he knows what the promises of the shipyard engineers are worth. During the first deep sea dive, the hull begins to make terrifying sounds. The steel compresses under the pressure, and it seems as if it might crack. But the ship holds. She is fast, powerful, and incredibly dangerous. Inside, K-19 is a chaos of instruments. The control room contains hundreds of sensors and switches. It smells of ozone, hot oil, and the sweat of 100 men. The crew is the elite, young men who passed the most rigorous selection. Among them is 22-year-old Boris Kochilov, the reactor control officer, a brilliant graduate devoted to the cause. He doesn't just believe in atomic energy, he lives by it. Life on K-19 resembles living in a maximum security prison that could explode at any second. There is no free space. Torpedoes lie in the corridors, and sailors sleep in suspended bunks stacked several high. The air circulates through scrubbers, but they work poorly. Every few hours, the carbon dioxide levels rise, causing a dull headache for the entire crew. Kochilov often stands watch at the reactor control panels. These panels are his world. He knows how the reactor breathes, how the pumps vibrate. But even he notices strange things. The radiation background in the compartments sometimes rises spontaneously. The biological shielding of the reactor was lightened to increase the boat's speed. The sailors joke, "At least our teeth will glow in the dark." They don't yet know that this is not a joke. Summer 1961. Operation Polar Circle. K-19 receives orders to deploy into the North Atlantic. The mission: pass under the multi-meter thick ice of the Arctic and reach a position for a practice missile launch. This is a test of endurance for everyone. Once the submarine goes under the solid ice ceiling, there is no turning back. If an accident occurs, surfacing is impossible. They must find Apollonia, an area of open water, but there are almost none in this sector. The sonar transmits a strange sound, the sound of ice grinding against the sail above. The depth is 200 meters. The water temperature outside is -2 degrees. Inside the compartments, it is a stifling 30 degrees. The boat moves in total silence, fearing to draw the attention of NATO's anti-submarine defenses. The psychological tension reaches its peak. Every rustle outside feels like an attack. While crossing a stormy region of the Atlantic, another mishap occurs. Massive walls of water tear away a section of the acoustic coating from the sail. Now, as she moves, the boat creates a significant acoustic noise. She is no longer a stealth vessel. She is easy prey for NATO sonars. Zateyev understands. The mission is compromised, but aborting it is not an option. In the reactor compartment, the temperature rises to 50 degrees Celsius. The working pumps generate an immense amount of heat. Sailors work in their underwear, drenched in sweat. The air is heavy and sticky. Kochilov checks the cooling systems every half hour. He is troubled by a vibration in the fifth compartment, but the sensors are still silent. July 4th, 4:15 a.m. Time in the ocean freezes. Suddenly, the main lighting across the ship goes out. A second later, the red bulbs of the emergency lighting flare up. The roar of a bursting pipe in the reactor compartment is heard even in the central post. The radiation control system issues a signal no one expected to hear in peacetime. Primary circuit leak. The pressure needle drops instantly. 200, 100, 50, 0. This means the reactor is no longer being cooled. The temperature of the nuclear fuel begins to rise uncontrollably. Physics is merciless. If the uranium overheats, it will melt through everything in its path. A chain reaction will begin. The boat will turn into a floating atomic bomb. Zateyev rushes into the central post. The report from the engineers is dry and terrifying. Primary circuit rupture. There is no backup system. We have 20 minutes before we reach critical fuel temp, and a thermal explosion occurs. Zateyev understands. This is the end. No one is coming to help. Long-range communication is dead. He must make a decision. The only decision that costs lives but can save the ship. Broadcasting from the sixth compartment, the air itself begins to glow. It is not the flickering light of the emergency lanterns. It is a haunting, unearthly blue brilliance. The Cherenkov effect. The air is so heavily ionized that light particles are literally being ejected from the atmosphere within the room. It is a visual manifestation of death. The engineers nearby can smell ozone, sickly sweet and metallic, the scent of the invisible fire. Zateyev announces over the ship's intercom, "I need a group of volunteers. 10 minutes in the reactor compartment is a death sentence. But if we do not do this, the entire ship will perish." Silence falls over the compartments. Men look at one another. They are 20 years old. They have mothers and wives back home. They want to live. First to step forward is Boris Kochilov. Then his subordinates follow. A team of 8 men. They understand they are going on a one-way trip. They have no choice. Either they die as heroes, or everyone together turns into ash. On their faces, there is no grandiosity, only absolute concentration. They have no lead aprons. The only thing on the boat is thin L1 rubber chemical suits. These protect against radioactive dust, but are absolutely useless against intense gamma radiation. It is like trying to seek shelter from a machine gun with an umbrella. But they put them on, sealing their masks. The heavy bulkhead opens. From the compartment hits a stream of hot, radioactive air. The temperature inside is already over 60 degrees Celsius. Visibility is near zero because of the steam. Korchalov goes in first. He must find the rupture point and guide the pipes from the fresh water tanks to the reactor. They begin welding. Their masks instantly fog up from the sweat. The men tear them off just to be able to see the arc. They are breathing in radioactive iodine and cesium. Every breath burns their lungs from the inside. Radiation strikes their cells at the speed of light, shattering DNA molecules. Boris Korchalov's face changes before their eyes. It turns crimson, then a dark cherry red. His skin begins to swell significantly, but he does not drop the torch. His hands are trembling, but the seam must be perfect. Otherwise, the water will never reach the reactor. The dose they are receiving is measured in thousands of Röntgens. For reference, a lethal dose is 400. They are receiving 5,000 to 6,000 Röntgens. Their nervous systems begin to fail. Blood vessels burst in their eyes. But they keep working. 8 men rotate every 5 to 10 minutes. As Korchalov finishes his shift, he cannot even remove his gloves. His hands have doubled in size. The skin feels stretched to the absolute limit. He vomits right inside the compartment, but forces himself to exit, to make room for the next man. Outside the compartment, those who emerge are met by their comrades. They see a terrifying sight. Young men vomiting blood and yellow bile. They collapse right on the deck. But their work was successful. The pipes are welded. The valve is opened. Cold water under pressure rushes into the glowing heart of the reactor. A terrifying hiss of evaporating water rings through the hull. The temperature of the uranium core stops rising. It was only a few degrees away from the critical point. The temperature needle begins its slow journey downward. A global catastrophe has been averted. There will be no thermal explosion. But the boat has turned into a massive X-ray machine. Radiation has been spread by the ventilation throughout all decks. In the control room, Zateyev sees on the instruments that radiation levels are off the scale everywhere. He knows they are all irradiated, but his engineers, they are dying already. The sickbay is filled with cries of pain. Medicine of the time has no means to help with such massive doses. K-19 is now dead iron, within which lives still flicker. Zateyev gives the order to surface. They must find help. But communication is still down. They are alone in the middle of the ocean. The submarine surfaces. She stands in the gray haze of the Atlantic, like a skeletal iron wreck. Inside, there is silence, broken only by the whimpering from the sick bay. Zateyev goes out onto the bridge. The ocean air feels divine to him, but he knows his lungs are already full of radiation. There is not a single Soviet ship on the horizon. They are drifting, but K-19 is not alone in this sector. Hours later, a silhouette appears on the horizon. It is not a Soviet flag. It is an American destroyer. It approaches slowly, its sonars probing K-19's hull. The Americans see a Soviet submarine standing dead in the water with its hatches open. They understand. A disaster has occurred. They begin signaling with a searchlight. Do you need assistance? We have doctors. We can evacuate your crew. For Zateyev, this is a moment of cold truth. Before him is an enemy offering salvation. His men are dying right now. Boris Korchalov can no longer see. Radiation has burned out his retinas. His skin has turned black. If he transfers the men to the American ship, they might be saved. But K-19 is full of secrets, communication codes, the reactor's design, and ballistic missile parameters. Zateyev understands the rules of the Cold War game. The death of men is a tragedy, but yielding secrets is a betrayal of the motherland. In Moscow, his family would face prison if he allowed the Americans on board. The crew would be branded traitors. He orders the reply sent. Assistance not required. Awaiting our own vessels. This decision triggers an explosion inside the boat. The political officer and a group of officers burst into the central post. They are in a rage. Zateyev, you are killing us all for the sake of a piece of secret steel. The Americans are our only hope. An argument breaks out. One officer's hand reaches for his holster. Zateyev realizes, one wrong move, one shot, and a massacre will begin inside a radioactive tomb. Then Zateyev does what no captain in history has ever done. He orders trusted midshipmen to gather every small arm on the boat. Officers and sailors watch in bewilderment as bags full of Kalashnikov rifles and Makarov pistols are carried onto the deck. One by one, they are thrown into the ocean. Now, we are all in the same boat, and no one has a weapon. I will be the one maintaining order. The rebellion is psychologically crushed. Zateyev stands before them, deathly pale, but unshakable. He orders them to prepare for defense. If the Americans try to board by force, the boat will be scuttled along with the entire crew and the nuclear missiles. It was a choice between a horrific death and dishonor, and Zateyev chose death. For 2 days, K-19 drifted under the guns of American warships. It was the longest watch in the crew's life. Men lost their teeth. Their hair fell out in clumps. Radiation was slowly but surely destroying their bodies. The Americans circled nearby, unable to understand why the Soviets refused rescue. On the 3rd day, when hope had almost flickered out, smoke appeared on the horizon. The Soviet diesel submarine S-270 was coming at full speed. It was the moment of the bitterest triumph in Zateyev's life. The transfer of the crew in stormy seas was a separate feat. Exhausted men were moved on lines between the submarines. K-19 was left to drift after all hatches were sealed. She would be towed back later. When they returned to base, they weren't met as heroes. They were met as a problem. All survivors were immediately isolated in closed military hospitals. They were forced to sign non-disclosure agreements for 30 years. The state didn't imprison them. The radiation had already done that. Zateyev stood on the pier for a long time, watching his crippled sailors being taken away in buses with blacked-out windows. He knew what awaited them. He was the commander of K-19 to the end. He did not leave until the last living soul had departed the boat. The heroic engineers died in excruciating agony. Medics were powerless. Boris Kochilov passed away 7 days later. His body was so radioactive that no one could approach him without protection, even after death. They were buried at night. The coffins were lined with lead, so the radiation wouldn't leach into the soil. No honors, no volleys, only the quiet sobs of mothers who were forbidden from naming the cause of their sons' deaths. Nikolai Zateyev lived a long life, but he never forgot the blue glow in the reactor compartment. He fought for the recognition of his men's heroism for decades. Before his death in 1998, he asked for one thing: to be buried next to his engineers. Today, at the Kuzminskoye Cemetery in Moscow, their monuments stand in a single row. The commander and his crew, together once more, on eternal watch. The story of K-19 is not a story of technology. It is the story of a man trapped between the madness of politics and the laws of physics. The ship, Hiroshima, has long since been cut for scrap, but its echo still rings through the silence of the ocean, reminding us of the price we pay for the right to hold the atom.